A man rode into the snow-covered mountains to shoot a runaway bride. But when he found her, she was in labor struggling to give birth. In that moment, he couldn't draw his gun, and he couldn't look away. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, because the Runaway story begins right here. The snow that morning wasn't falling with a knife-like cold, it was almost gentle, like a quiet mercy. Silence had smothered all sound beneath the white veil descending from the sky. The man riding slowly, hunched like a shadow on his horse, wasn't listening to the wind but to the roar inside him. His name was Jonas Kramer. People thought twice before letting his name pass their lips. Once, they called him the Hunter. But now, he hunted less after men, more after ghosts from his past. And each step on this path echoed with the price he'd paid. Inside his coat, right over his heart, he carried a crumpled bounty poster. A faded face, a roughly sketched veil, and beneath it in harsh letters, Runaway Bride. Dangerous. Pregnant. Reward offered. There was no name, but Jonas believed he knew who she was. She was one of those women faces he had seen too many times, broken but still fighting. At the forest's edge, he found a snow-covered trail. Still fresh. He slowed his horse, eyes scanning the trees. The silence still blanketed everything, but Jonas's instincts whispered something was about to move. The first sound wasn't a scream. It was like a breath, ragged and strained. Jonas tied his horse to a tree and stepped into the snow on foot. He tried to keep his fingers away from the trigger, but old habits made his hand twitch toward the weapon. Then, by the edge of a wrecked wagon, half buried in snow, he spotted a shape. The snow had covered the woman so much, it was hard to tell if she was even alive. As Jonas got closer, his hand moved instinctively to the rifle on his back. But then her eyes opened, and what she said made him freeze. "Don't give him the child." That was all. She said it before her breath turned to mist and vanished. Jonas knelt, fingers reaching for her freezing wrist. Her pulse was weak, but there. Then he noticed a baby under the wagon, wrapped in cloth. Silent. So silent, it almost didn't seem like a child at all, more like a forgotten shadow. Jonas wrapped the child in his coat. The baby's eyes were open, but there was no spark in them. No fear, no comfort, just emptiness. The woman's belly was swollen, her hands slick with blood and sweat. Labor had started. As snow kept falling on them, time turned into a race. Jonas didn't hesitate. He lifted her into his arms, secured her on the horse, and tucked the child beneath his coat. Going back would kill them. But a few miles down the path, there was an old hunter's cabin. Maybe fate hadn't led Jonas here for a reward, but for a choice. The path downhill was treacherous. Every step the horse took was a risk. Jonas whispered to both the woman and the horse, like the words themselves might keep them alive. "Hold on. Just a little more. Breathe." By the time they reached the cabin, daylight was almost gone. The wood creaked in the wind, but inside, there was a stove. Jonas laid the woman near the fire. His hands trembled, but not from the cold. Maybe for the first time, he was about to save a life. He placed the child beside the mother, still silent, but watching Jonas. The woman's contractions grew stronger. Jonas prepped bandages, water, fed the fire. When labor began, the cabin turned into a primal theater. The woman didn't scream, just clenched silence between her teeth. Jonas's hands had only ever carried death before. Now, they had to hold life. And when the moment came, a tiny girl was born with a sound like a cracking twig. Jonas wrapped her up and placed her in the woman's arms. The woman didn't cry, but the way she clutched the baby, it was like she had finally found the one thing that made her feel safe. For the first time, Jonas had purpose and no one had to die for it. But outside, the wind still howled. The snow still fell. And that night, Jonas Kramer realized this was only the beginning. The wind had started to blow even harsher with the first light of morning. The roof of the cabin was still holding against winter, but Jonas's mind had already begun to unravel. Huddled around the fire were 3 lives, 1 newborn, 1 silent child, and 1 woman who still hadn't said her name. But Jonas could no longer see her as just the runaway bride. He was going to call her Clara. Even her silence seemed to carry that name. Clara opened her eyes in the early hours of the morning. Her body still bore the marks of childbirth, but something in her eyes had shifted. She didn't just want to survive anymore, she wanted to fight. When Jonas handed her some warm water, she looked him straight in the eyes for the first time. She didn't ask, "Why did you bring me?" She just whispered, "You're hiding too, aren't you?" Jonas didn't answer, because he didn't have one. Maybe the answer was in the tiny breath the child made while clinging to its mother. Or maybe it was written in the note Jonas had found pinned to the cabin door earlier that morning. "We found your trail. Bring the woman back, or we'll take you both." R. Jonas pressed his fingers against the edge of the paper. The words didn't smell like dried ink, they smelled like a direct threat. The letter R was clear. Reuben, a former executioner, now a so-called sheriff. His idea of justice was only as strong as his fists and as fast as his gun. And he was the friend more like the owner of the man who claimed Clara as his husband. When Jonas went back inside, Clara had already put the baby to sleep and brought the child close. But her face held a new kind of silence, not one of surrender, but of preparation for the storm that was coming. Jonas didn't hand her the note. Instead, he tossed it into the stove and said only, "Looks like the road ends here. But no one's going to break down this door." Clara nodded. "If that man shows up, I know what he'll do to my children," she said. Her voice didn't tremble, but Jonas's stomach twisted. He couldn't know everything that woman had been through, but the darkness in her eyes said more than words ever could. That night, Jonas didn't sleep. He kept watch outside the cabin. His hands rested on his rifle, but not on the trigger. Because for the first time, he didn't want to kill, he wanted to protect. Maybe for the first time in his life, he wanted to carry trust instead of blood. Just after dawn, a shadow approached. He wasn't alone. Jonas peered through the brush and saw Reuben coming with 3 men. The sound of hooves echoed heavily on the snow. Darkness peeled back behind them, revealing more and more of the threat with each step. Jonas lifted his rifle, but didn't fire. He silently pulled back and returned to the cabin. Clara was already awake. She held the baby in her arms, eyes fixed on Jonas. The child stood silently nearby. Jonas locked the door. "They're here." Clara nodded. "Don't give me to them. But don't let them take the children either." Footsteps stopped just outside the door. Then a fist. Then a voice. "Jonas, we know you're in there. We've got papers. You're going to hand over the woman. Or we'll name you a criminal too." Jonas felt a chill inside. Clara sank to the floor, cradling the baby. Jonas looked from the bloody marks of birth on her gown to her pale lips. "I won't let them touch you." The door shook again. Jonas gripped his rifle and stood behind it. But his fingers still hadn't touched the trigger. Because he wasn't just defending a person now, he was protecting a brand new life. And then, it wasn't from the outside. A small hand touched Jonas's arm. The silent child looked up at him. There were no words in those eyes, but there was a decision. That was when Jonas understood. This fight hadn't started with him, but it was going to end with him. When the door shook for the 3rd time, the only sound left in the cabin was the pounding of hearts. Clara was kneeling on the floor, clutching the baby tightly to her chest. The child's tiny hands were gripping the hem of her dress. Jonas stepped back, his eyes never leaving the door. He still hadn't pulled the trigger, but in that moment, his eyes were as cold as any weapon. The voice outside had changed. They weren't yelling anymore. Reuben wasn't speaking. Instead, a young, impatient voice rose up. "No need to count. If you don't open up, we'll break it down. And we won't be responsible for what happens inside." Jonas's lip twitched. He recognized that kind of threat, the fake calm, right before an attack. When they stopped shouting, that's when the fight was most real. He moved his hand away from the rifle. With steady steps, he turned to Clara. "Get ready. They're coming in." Clara didn't nod. She just locked eyes with him and whispered, "If they take me, they'll find me in death, not in labor this time." That was the moment Jonas realized she wasn't just a runaway bride. She hadn't just fled, she was fighting. This wasn't escape. This was quiet rebellion from someone who had torn off their chains. The doorknob turned, then a single blow shook everything. Jonas pulled back, guided Clara to the wall, and took the child beside her. "No matter what," he said, "don't move from here." The door shattered with a gust of wind, and 3 men rushed in, hands on their guns. But they didn't fire, at least not right away. They saw Jonas standing alone, waiting. Reuben was in the back, standing in the doorway. His presence alone seemed to dirty the air in the room. He tilted his head, eyes scanning Jonas. "Found yourself a new family, Kramer?" Jonas didn't lower his rifle, but he didn't raise it in threat either. "Where you come from still stinks, Reuben. But your words, they're even more rotten." The other 2 men stepped forward. When one moved toward Clara, Jonas's voice turned sharp. "Don't touch her. One more step, and your life ends right there." The man stopped, but his hand stayed near his belt. Reuben laughed with contempt. You trying to be the hero now, Jonas? How many people died at your hands? How many names did you write in your little ledger? And now what? Diapers and rifles in the same bag. Jonas tilted his head. Yeah, I killed some of those men, but I never strangled them in their sleep. I never kicked their wives in front of their children. There was a silence. Reuben's eyes narrowed. So, the woman's been talking. Jonas's voice was ice cold. She didn't have to. Her body told the whole story without a single word. Clara stood up, baby still in her arms. The child was by her side, still quiet, but this time, he had stepped forward. Jonas noticed his little fist was clenched, as if ready to punch. Clara's voice was steady. That man wasn't my husband. He was just a traitor who bought me. He had a paper. But what about my soul? Where was that? Whose pocket held the deed to my soul? Reuben stepped forward. Enough. You're coming with us. It's the law. Jonas stepped in front. That paper? It's just a handwritten lie. A child was born in this cabin, and none of you were here when it happened. So you'd better watch your mouth in front of her. The younger man reached for his weapon. Jonas's finger was already on the trigger, but then something happened. The child spoke. She's my mom, and we're not leaving. His words were soft, but they hit like a shout. Reuben stepped back. The threat collapsed in an instant because when a child speaks, even wars fall silent. Jonas didn't lower his rifle, but the steel in his eyes began to soften. Reuben lowered his head, looked at the others, then spat with a growl. This isn't over, Jonas. No, Jonas said. It's not. But if you ever come back, you'll be digging your own grave. The men pulled back. By the time they stepped outside, a snowstorm had begun. The white covered their tracks almost instantly. Inside the cabin, silence fell. But not the kind born of fear. This was the silence of rebirth. Jonas leaned his rifle against the wall. Clara turned to him. I never told you my name, but you never treated me like someone without one. Jonas nodded. Names don't matter, Clara. What matters is remembering who you are when someone's still standing with you. And outside, the wind kept blowing. But this time, there was finally a refuge inside. 3 days had passed. The snow had slowly begun to melt, but the cold inside the cabin wasn't just about the weather. Reuben hadn't returned. That didn't ease Jonas. For some men, silence was nothing but an invitation before the storm. Clara could walk now, the baby against her chest, her eyes constantly turned to the door. But the trembling anticipation inside her had shifted, hardened into resolve. Jonas had noticed. There was still something burning inside that woman. A small, stubborn spark. And sparks given the right wind could grow. Every morning, Jonas stepped outside, patrolled around the cabin, chopped wood, searched for signs. One morning, just past the cabin, he found a worn cloth stuck in the pine branches. It had stitched letters on it. Initials. CW. Jonas clenched the fabric in his palm. C. That was Clara. But W? That day, Clara was the one who started the conversation for the first time. Jonas, have you ever had a home? Jonas thought for a moment. Stirring the fire, he replied, I had a place. Not a home. Clara nodded. My name used to be Clara Weiler. Once, when they sold me for 8 goats and 2 barrels of flour, I didn't keep the last name. But I still carried it with me. They gave me that cloth as a scarf, like I was becoming someone's wife. Jonas showed her the fabric. Clara smiled, but her smile was like glass. Cold and ready to break. It was the only thing that was mine. If I left it behind, it means I can't go back anymore. Jonas leaned down, placed the cloth gently by the stove. Then from now on, you won't carry anything they gave you, only what you choose. That day, the child asked Jonas a question for the first time. Why are you here? Jonas paused, then answered, because this is the only place I'm supposed to stay now. But when night came, the shadow they had been waiting for finally appeared. The sound of hooves in the distance stabbed the icy air like nails. When Jonas looked through the window, he didn't see Reuben but 5 armed men. No woman among them. No papers either. This time, they wouldn't talk. Jonas moved fast. He whispered to Clara, stay in the ditch behind the cabin. With the children. Don't come out until you hear me. Clara didn't protest. This time, she accepted the command like words because there was no fear in Jonas's voice anymore. Only trust. Jonas grabbed his rifle. Before opening the door, he blew out the lamp inside. Darkness was his oldest friend. As he stepped outside, he said only one thing. By the end of today, Only two things will be left on this mountain: the snow, or a choice. He took position between the pines. The moonlight cast a clear silhouette over the snow. When the first man dismounted, Jonas didn't recognize his face, but he knew that butcher's walk, the shape of those shoulders. The second man fired first. The bullet hit the bucket next to the cabin. Jonas waited, held his breath before aiming, then quietly pulled the trigger. The first man dropped. Chaos broke loose. Jonas didn't fall back. Every move was calculated. Gunfire echoed off the trees like thunder. But this wasn't a battle, it was a reckoning. Reuben wasn't there. He had sent his men ahead, still hiding behind the curtain. Jonas knew this, so he used his bullets wisely. Not to kill out of rage, but to protect life. Only two were left. The others had run or fallen. Jonas checked his ammo. One bullet left. That's when instinct made him turn his head. Movement in the brush. Clara. She had stepped out by mistake, the baby bundled in her arms, but her eyes locked on Jonas. Then he saw the child, holding a stick like a weapon, stepping forward to protect Clara. One of the men took aim. Jonas didn't hesitate. The final bullet hit its mark. The man flew back and dropped beneath a tree. Silence returned. Clara dropped to her knees. When Jonas reached her, she could only say one sentence. "Can this be our home now?" Jonas didn't answer. But for the first time that night, the snow wasn't stained with blood, but with tears. The snow had started again. But this time, it wasn't gentle. The sky had collapsed over them like a pure white lie. The wind bent the trees, and the roof of the cabin creaked. Jonas stood motionless at the window. Clara was inside, nursing her baby. The child knelt quietly on the floor, watching Jonas. There was no fear in his eyes anymore, only waiting, as if he knew too. Today, this house would decide. Would they stay, or would they have to run again? Finally, Jonas turned around, and for the first time, he spoke about himself. "I used to have a family too. A wife, a son. He'd make horses out of mud with his little hands. Then one day, I followed the wrong man. He was on a bounty list. That night, the two waiting for me at home never saw the morning." Clara didn't look away. "Did you ever forgive yourself?" Jonas lowered his head. "No, but when I found the man who stained their names, I didn't shoot to forgive. I shot to make it quiet." Clara said nothing. The baby's breathing was steady now. The child's fingers were gripping a piece of cloth. The old rag Jonas had given Clara, the one he'd told her to live only with what she chose. Just then, the sound of horses echoed. Not just one or two. Jonas looked out the window. 6 men. And in the middle, Reuben. This time he wasn't alone. A sheriff's star on his shoulder. A folded document in his hand. But war in his face. Jonas sighed. He's not playing games this time. There was no knock. Just a voice. "Jonas Kramer. I'm here on behalf of the state. Surrender the fugitive Clara Weiler. I have orders. I brought witnesses. Resist, and you'll stand trial beside her." Jonas leaned against the door. Justice in dirty hands is just an excuse in disguise. Reuben laughed. This woman abandoned her husband, kidnapped a child, filed a fake birth notice, and took refuge with a killer. That's what the records say. Jonas didn't open the door, but his voice was firm. Records are never clean enough to wash away blood. Clara stepped forward. Her eyes no longer held the look of a fleeing woman, but of a standing mother. "This child is not his. Nothing given to me by a man who beat me, who counted my bones, can be part of this baby." Reuben fell silent. Just a breath. Then slammed the papers against the door. "This document says she's property." Jonas opened the door. Slowly. He wasn't holding a weapon, just his hands. "And this woman is telling you what she is now. She's no one's property anymore." Reuben stepped in, but as he did, he saw the child, standing beside his mother. No gun, no stick. Just a voice loud and clear for the first time. "My mom is no one's victim anymore." The sentence struck the air. Reuben froze, still holding the paper. "Then save her in court. But today, she's coming with me." Jonas slowly turned to Clara. There was only one answer in her eyes, and it revealed itself when she gripped Jonas's hand. This wasn't escape anymore, it was defiance. Clara took a step forward, faced Reuben. "You weren't my husband," she said, "but those papers signed your name to me." Clara parted her lips. "Then write this down too. Clara Weiler never belonged to anyone again." Jonas raised his hands. "We'll come. But if anyone draws a weapon while we're walking out of this cabin, it won't be a court that speaks, it'll be the gravestones." Reuben lowered his head, gave a signal. The men dropped their weapons. Tomorrow, this woman will speak in court. And if her words mark your end, Jonas, be ready for it. Jonas nodded. I already died years ago. This woman brought me back to life. Clara looked at the child. He raised his head. And for the first time, Clara wasn't just a mother. She was a witness, a stand, a future. That night, the cabin was emptied. But its walls had borne witness to a quiet birth, a silent scream, and a silent resurrection. On the road to the courthouse, 3 people walked. One carrying the weight of the past, one speaking the language of silence, and one walking only with the heart. The courtroom was silent. So silent that the sound of a pin falling to the floor could have been heard as clearly as sworn testimony. Jonas sat in the back row, still wearing that old coat, with months of sleepless nights carved into his eyes. But his back was straight, because now, he wasn't just a man, he was a witness. Clara was at the front. The baby waited outside in the arms of a neighbor woman. The little boy sat beside her. His hand touched Clara's skirt. It wasn't just a gesture, it was a vow. The judge reviewed the files. Clara Weiler, he said, you're being accused based on documents submitted by a man, abandoning your marriage, kidnapping a child, and using a false identity. What do you say? Clara lifted her eyes, and the entire room heard her voice. My name is Clara Weiler, but no one ever spoke that name to me with love. Not my father, not my husband, not his friends. Only papers. They gave me away for 8 goats and some flour. With a child growing inside me, that man saw me as nothing but a burden to carry. I didn't run. I escaped. Don't believe the papers, believe my tears. The room froze. Reuben stood tall. The sheriff's star still gleamed on his chest, but his expression was no longer that of a man. He looked like a ghost who had lost his mask. The prosecutor turned to Jonas. You, Jonas Kramer, you're accused of hiding Clara, pointing weapons at our men, and injuring at least 2 people. What do you say? Jonas stood. His voice was calm. For the first time, I raised a weapon to protect. I didn't defend Clara, I defended her right to live. And those men, they were hired hands sent by Reuben. No one came to me with a court order. They came with bullets. And that boy, he carries the heart that's learning to speak again. Protecting him wasn't a law I followed, it was a debt I owed. Reuben objected. That woman was my wife. That's what the law says. The judge asked, did you have a legal marriage with Clara? There's no signature from her on this document. Reuben said nothing. The judge asked again, did she consent? This time, Reuben stepped forward. A woman's place is not to give consent. The papers speak. And then, the child stood up, only 6 years old. But in that moment, the whole courtroom fell silent. The papers didn't beat my mom. Hands did. Eyes didn't stay quiet. And none of you looked into those eyes. The judge removed his glasses, placed his hands on the bench, took a deep breath. Enough. The word rang out like a bell. Reuben Meyer, you forced Clara into captivity under the name of marriage. She had no say, but the law says a contract without consent, even on paper, is void. Reuben shouted, that woman's past isn't clean. The judge raised a hand. But her future is being written here today. Clara Weiler, you are free. You are no one's wife, no one's daughter, no one's burden or penance. From this moment, you are only you. Court adjourned. Jonas didn't move. Clara approached him, reached out her hand. I never called for you, but you came. Jonas nodded. Because for the first time, I saw you as someone. Not a fugitive, not a victim, just Clara. The child ran to Jonas and hugged him. And for the first time, Jonas didn't hold a weapon, he held a small shoulder. Outside, spring had begun. The snow had melted, revealing the earth beneath. Jonas, Clara, and the children walked together. They left the courthouse behind, not leaving their past, but carrying it with them, not as a weight, but as witness. Jonas turned back. So, where to now? Clara smiled softly. Home. This time, a place we'll build together. And at that moment, the wind blew gently. But it carried no chill, no fear, only one word: freedom. If this story touched you, drop a comment and let us know. Give it a like, and make sure to subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next.